Lee Van Cleef, born Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, came from a working-class family of Dutch descent. His upbringing offered few clues to the iconic Hollywood legacy he would one day forge. After completing high school, Van Cleef enlisted in the U.S. Navy during World War II, serving with distinction aboard a minesweeper in the Pacific Theater. His time in the military instilled a strong sense of discipline, composure, and precision, qualities that would later define his presence on screen. When the war ended, Van Cleef returned to civilian life, working a series of jobs, including accountant and house painter. His fate shifted when he appeared in a local stage production where his commanding presence drew the attention of Hollywood talent scouts. In 1952, he made his film debut in High Noon, playing a silent, menacing gunman. Though the role had no dialogue, his angular features, piercing gaze, and hawk-like nose made an indelible impression. While he didn't fit the mold of a traditional Hollywood leading man, his distinctive look became his greatest asset. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Van Cleef was frequently cast as the villain in westerns and crime dramas. He specialized in playing cold-blooded henchmen, dangerous outlaws, and deadly assassins. Even without top billing, he had a knack for making small roles unforgettable. Films like Kansas City Confidential 1952, The Big Combo 1955, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance 1962 showcased his ability to dominate a scene with minimal words. In 1958, a devastating car accident left him with a severe knee injury, threatening to end his acting career. But the 1960s brought an unexpected resurgence. Director Sergio Leone cast Van Cleef in For a Few Dollars More, 1965, alongside Clint Eastwood. Playing Colonel Douglas Mortimer, a refined but lethal bounty hunter, Van Cleef stunned audiences and critics with a depth of performance rarely afforded to him before. This marked his transformation from a typecast villain to a respected leading man, a rare accomplishment in Hollywood. A year later, he reunited with Eastwood in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly 1966, portraying the ruthless Angel Eyes. The film became a genre-defining classic and propelled Van Cleef to international stardom. Unlike many actors whose careers faded when the Western's popularity waned, Van Cleef fully embraced the spaghetti Western movement, starring in a steady stream of European productions. His filmography during this period included The Big Gun Down 1966, Death Rides a Horse 1967, Day of Anger 1967, and Sabata 1969. These roles solidified his mastery of the quiet, calculating anti-hero, characters who relied on intelligence and strategy rather than sheer bravado. He exuded a quiet authority, carrying an ever-present sense of danger without resorting to loud heroics. This moral complexity became his signature. Fans admired not only his on-screen performances, but also the authenticity he brought, shaped by personal hardship and life experience. By the 1980s, Van Cleef expanded into television and action films, starring as the authoritarian police commissioner in Escape from New York, 1981, and taking the lead in the NBC series The Master, 1984, as a retired ninja master. Though not all of his later projects were critical successes, they proved his ability to adapt to changing trends in entertainment. Van Cleef's personal life was equally eventful. His first marriage to Patty Ruth Cale in 1943 began during the wartime years and produced 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son. But the strain of balancing fatherhood with a demanding acting career eventually led to their divorce in 1958 after 15 years. In 1960, he married Joan Marjorie Drain, entering a period of recovery from his serious accident while trying to revitalize his career. Joan remained with him during his meteoric rise in European cinema, but after 14 years, the marriage ended in 1974. 2 years later, in 1976, he married Barbara Havlone. By then, Van Cleef was an international star, especially beloved in Europe. Barbara was a stabilizing force during his final years, supporting him through health struggles stemming from his accident and long-term smoking. Their marriage lasted until his death in 1989, and Barbara continued to honor his legacy afterward. Though widely respected for his professionalism, Van Cleef's strong personality meant he didn't get along with everyone. Here are the 6 actors he reportedly disliked the most. John Wayne. While both were titans of the Western genre, their philosophies clashed. Wayne embodied the polished, patriotic image of the Hollywood cowboy, while Van Cleef championed the gritty, morally complex style of European westerns. Van Cleef resented Wayne's dismissive attitude toward spaghetti westerns, once referring to him as Hollywood's mascot. They never co-starred, and Van Cleef reportedly avoided him entirely at industry events. Charles Bronson, The Battle of the Brooding Alphas. Charles Bronson and Lee Van Cleef were often considered cut from a similar cloth, rugged, laconic, and intense screen presences who could carry a film with a single scowl. But Van Cleef reportedly bristled at the constant comparisons and harbored an underlying animosity toward Bronson, particularly in the 1970s when both were at the height of their European fame. The tipping point may have come when Bronson secured the lead role in Once Upon a Time in the West, a Sergio Leone epic that Van Cleef had expressed interest in. While Leone had previously favored Van Cleef, he chose Bronson instead for the lead. Van Cleef allegedly took this as a professional betrayal and questioned Leone's loyalty. In later interviews, Van Cleef subtly jabbed at Bronson's wooden acting and once quipped that a block of granite could show more emotion. On set, when the two briefly crossed paths during overlapping productions in Spain, tension was said to be so thick that producers deliberately staggered their shooting schedules. Despite both actors being stoic professionals, Van Cleef considered Bronson's meteoric rise an example of Hollywood rewarding style over substance, which Van Cleef, trained in theater and method acting, found insulting. Clint Eastwood, from protege to pariah. Perhaps the most surprising inclusion on this list is Clint Eastwood, the man who helped elevate Lee Van Cleef to international fame. Their work together in For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was legendary. But behind the scenes, their relationship was far more fraught than it appeared on screen. Initially, Van Cleef admired Eastwood's calm demeanor and ambition. But as Eastwood's fame exploded in the 1970s, Van Cleef felt discarded. He believed Eastwood had used their collaborations as a stepping stone and then turned his back on the actors and directors who had helped him rise. Eastwood's transition from actor to director further widened the gap, especially when he didn't cast Van Cleef in later westerns like High Plains Drifter or Pale Rider, roles Van Cleef thought were tailor-made for him. Rumors suggest that Van Cleef even reached out to Eastwood's production company for potential collaborations in the early 1980s, but was politely ignored. In interviews, Van Cleef was diplomatic but firm. Clint's Gone Hollywood, he once said, "He's traded in dust and grit for cameras and cocktails." Though Eastwood never responded publicly, industry insiders confirmed the coldness between the two legends was real. Telly Savalas, the eccentric showman versus the stoic gunslinger. Telly Savalas, best known for his role as Kojak, crossed paths with Van Cleef during the 1970s when both were frequent presences in European crime and action films. Savalas, with his flamboyant personality and ego-driven approach to fame, reportedly rubbed Van Cleef the wrong way. Van Cleef was a no-nonsense professional who valued discipline and subtlety, whereas Savalas enjoyed the limelight, often dominating sets with his charisma and unpredictable behavior. During a brief overlapping production in Italy, allegedly on adjacent sets, Van Cleef was said to have walked off after hearing Savalas mock his acting style as stone-faced squinting. Their personalities were simply oil and water. Savalas was the loud, cigar-chomping scene stealer, while Van Cleef embodied a quiet, controlled menace. Rumors persisted that Van Cleef refused any future offers that would pair them together, citing creative incompatibility, his diplomatic way of saying, "I can't stand that guy." Yul Brynner, the ego with a cowboy hat. Yul Brynner, famous for the Magnificent Seven, was another figure Van Cleef held in contempt. While both actors had roots in westerns, Van Cleef viewed Brynner as too theatrical and too concerned with his carefully curated image. Their differences were aesthetic and philosophical. Brynner was smooth-mannered and often aloof, while Van Cleef was raw, grounded, and intense. Their paths crossed at several European film festivals and award shows, and though cordial in public, Van Cleef reportedly found Brenner arrogant and dismissive. A famous behind-the-scenes story involves Brenner allegedly turning down a co-starring role with Van Cleef because he didn't want to share the screen with a second-string gunslinger. Van Cleef never forgave that comment and often cited Brenner as an example of Hollywood elitism. When asked in a European interview in 1985 about actors he respected, Van Cleef notably omitted Brenner from a list that included Henry Fonda, Franco Nero, and even Charles Bronson. That omission spoke volumes. James Coburn, A Clash of Cool. James Coburn, known for his smooth charisma and effortlessly cool demeanor, may seem like an unlikely target of Van Cleef's ire. However, the friction reportedly stemmed from Coburn's casual attitude toward acting and his tendency to overshadow others with laid-back charm. Van Cleef, who had to fight tooth and nail for recognition in Hollywood, felt that Coburn had sauntered into stardom, coasting on charm rather than craft. A particularly sour incident allegedly occurred when both actors were considered for the same lead role in a European Western. The part went to Coburn, prompting Van Cleef to accuse the producers of choosing swagger over substance. The bitterness grew when Van Cleef heard Coburn joke in an interview that Lee always looks like someone stole his horse. Although the comment was likely meant in jest, Van Cleef, ever the serious, prideful craftsman, took it as an insult. While they were never overtly hostile in public, Van Cleef reportedly warned younger actors not to model yourself after Coburn unless you want to sleepwalk through your career. Though Lee Van Cleef was a consummate professional on set, his strong sense of artistic integrity and disdain for arrogance, favoritism, and studio politics led him to harbor grudges against some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Whether it was ideological differences with John Wayne, personal betrayal from Clint Eastwood, or personality clashes with Savalas and Brenner, Van Cleef's list of Hollywood foes reflects not pettiness, but a deep commitment to the craft and a refusal to play the fame game. In the dusty corners of cinematic history, these rivalries add yet another layer to the mystique of the man who was above all the bad, and proudly so. Despite suffering from heart disease from the 1970s and having a pacemaker installed in the 1980s, Van Cleef continued to work in films until his death on December 16, 1989. He collapsed from a heart attack in his home in Oxnard, California. Throat cancer was listed as a secondary cause of death.